I've got a really cool analogy, and I can do it in story form. It's what kind of happens after you break a fast as far as inflammation is concerned. Have you ever felt really foggy after you eat, after you break a fast? Have you ever felt super fatigued? Have you ever felt like dehydrated, sort of that same feeling where your joints hurt, everything just feels kind of wacky? I certainly have, okay, I've been there. And there are some potential mechanisms. And before we get into the analogy and sort of the story with this, let me make a full disclaimer here. When you eat, you're going to have inflammation, so it's no surprise. But what happens is with fasting, there is such a quelling of inflammation that by contrast, the spike in inflammation can A, feel a lot worse than it is, but B, it can potentially be more pronounced. And a lot of times it seems to be driven by too much, operative words, too much in the way of glucose and too much of an insulin spike. However, the data that we're going to look at and the analogy that I'm going to talk about have been built off of, unfortunately, an in vitro study and a rodent model study. But we can still take what we can from it to really optimize to be our best self. So let's dive in. So I'm going to paint a picture for you real quick. Imagine that you have this big building, okay? And you have a janitor in this building. And this janitor goes in to work early in the morning to make sure he turns on all the heaters in all of the rooms. Okay, he's doing a really good job. He's making sure the building's warm. Okay, well, what he does is sometimes he turns on some heaters, sometimes he leaves some off, because if he turns all of them on, well, he'll be making this place really hot, right? Well, the janitor is what is called a toll-like receptor, okay, and we'll talk about that in a second. The little heaters that he's turning on, those are genes. So when he turns on a heater, he is expressing a gene for all intents and purposes. So normally he's expressing just enough genes to get just enough heat in the building. In this case, heat is inflammation. Okay, so toll-like receptor activates genes to cast just enough inflammation to keep us at our operating temperature, or in this case, the school or the building, right? But unfortunately, sometimes he has way too much caffeine and way too much sugar. And when he has too much sugar, he doesn't know what to do with himself. So he runs around the school, runs around the building, turning on the heaters in all the rooms. By 11 a.m., this building is 120 degrees and everyone is sweltering. Inflammation is sky high because toll-like receptor has expressed so many genes throughout the building. Okay, well, is there study with this, or is this just a random analogy that Thomas pulled out of his ear? No, there is some stuff. It was published in the Journal of Nutrition and Biochemistry. Okay, now it was a rodent model study, but they had rodents fast for 48 hours, so a relatively good length fast. So at the end of this fast, they had these mice break their fast with a few different options. One was a standard diet, which was about 60% carbohydrates. Another was a 100% pure carbohydrate diet. And the other was what they called a lower carb diet, which was like 38% carb. Not exactly low, but lower than the others. Well, what they found was that the 60% and the 100% higher carbohydrate groups ended up triggering a significant increase in what is called CXCL10, CXCL1, and CXCL2, as well as LCAN1. These are what are called chemokines, motif chemokines, and these chemokines are like soldiers for the inflammation system. Okay, so when those are elevated, we have an inflammatory response happening in the body. Maybe fatigue, maybe swelling, whatever, you name it, right? Well, this is mediated by what is called a toll-like receptor, the janitor. So in this particular case, they determined, researchers concluded, that these mice had the increase in inflammation, or chemokines, because toll-like receptor proteins were activated so much. Okay, this demonstrates what could potentially be happening after we break a fast if we have way too much in the way of carbohydrates. Breaking a fast in general is going to trigger an inflammatory response. There's no denying that. But it looks as though potentially carbohydrates might make that inflammation even worse. But it doesn't mean that you can't have carbohydrates after you break a fast. You just don't want to do it right when you break a fast. I typically recommend breaking your fast with protein. I've talked about this before. So one of the things that I really recommend is having your food stocked ahead of time, having your pantry stocked, having your fridge stocked, because I understand at the end of a fast, it's very easy to just go for whatever's available. Like, we have changes that happen. Normally we can operate with our prefrontal cortex where we can think through our decision making, but as we get more hungry, that transfers more into what's called the amygdala, which is much more of an emotional response. So as we become more and more hungry at the end of a fast, we're much more apt to make a decision out of pure impulse and emotion. which means like what you have available becomes increasingly important. So I put a link down below. You can save 25% off your entire grocery order with Thrive Market. So Thrive Market is an online grocery store that just ships everything to your doorstep. It's so easy, but that's not what makes it cool. There's lots of online retailers. They have better for you options. Okay, so I have sat with them and I have even vetted some of the products that they bring on the shelves. Okay, so it's really about how can we get the good products on the shelves to give people good options. And you can sort by different diet types. So I have like fasting bundles. I have all this stuff that I've sorted in terms of my favorite foods. So that things like chomp sticks or maybe roam sticks, like these really good quality beef or pork sticks, great proteins to break a fast with, and you can keep them in the car with you. Like there's nothing better than having a chomp stick or something really high quality. So anyway, the point is, I put a link down below. It'll save you 25% off your entire grocery order. Okay, not just one item. Entire grocery order, plus you get a free gift. So that link down below, 25% off Thrive Market, and a big thank you to them. So this next study was looking at what's called the NLRP3 inflammasome, which I've always laughed because the NLRP3 inflammasome, it sounds like, like the greasers, right? Like if you've ever this, I don't know, like little street gang that's like, we're the inflammasome. It just sounds funny. Anyway, point is that the inflammasome, the NLRP3 inflammasome is like a big master switch. Okay, when the NLRP3 inflammasome is activated, a lot of inflammatory signals are going. Okay, when we are fasting, the NLRP3 inflammasome is lower. A, because we're not eating, and B, because a lot of times ketones are present, which have an effect on the NLRP3 inflammasome, as well as what's called nuclear factor kappa B. When those are suppressed, inflammation is low. In fact, inflammation can be about 2.5x lower during a fast than literally 3 hours after breaking it. So 3 hours after breaking a fast, the inflammasome goes up 2.5x. Well, here's an interesting study that looks in a cultured dish, a cultured cell, what happens specifically to kidney cells. This was very interesting. The journal Diabetes Research wanted to figure out some links with diabetic neuropathy, like why diabetes can affect us the way it does. So in this case, they took cultured kidney cells and they treated these kidney cells with amounts of glucose. Well, what they found is that there was a dose-dependent relationship between how much glucose they gave these cells and the increase in the NLRP3 inflammasome. The more glucose, the more inflammatory increase. This is sketchy, right? Now, again, it doesn't really surprise me because, okay, if you're gonna give a cell a stimulus, something's gonna happen. But the dose-dependent part is what was kind of intriguing to me. We know that in a fasted state, the NLRP3 inflammasome, or at least we seem to know, is lower. Okay, so we know that when we give it food, it's going to increase. But some people like to believe that it's just a simple on-off switch and that it's not a dimmer switch, right? They think that once you eat, inflammation goes up and it goes up to your upper baseline of where it should be. Well, it doesn't seem like that, at least in the cultured studies. Like where you're looking at, it's almost like the more glucose, the more that dimmer switch is going up and you're having a potentially higher increase in inflammation. And I know I sound like a broken record when I say inflammation is going to increase when you eat regardless. It is. But your sensitivity to that inflammation might be enhanced even more because it's gotten so low during a fast. So again, if we are seeming to understand that glucose could be an issue here, why is it so hard to just say, okay, I'll break my fast with protein, and then later on I'll have glucose? I think you're gonna find that you end up having less of that foggy feeling. I certainly do. If I break my fast and I have some rice cakes or something like that and I spike my insulin high, yeah, 30, 40, 60 minutes later, I feel run down. And the last thing I would want to do is go to the gym or work out after that. So it's kind of interesting. When you start paying attention to what you put in your mouth at the end of a fast, it really can dictate a lot. So as always, keep it locked in here on my channel, and I'll see you tomorrow.